So firstly, let me start with my short introduction. I am Advocate Robina Casey, Program Associate at Porch Project in Youth Innovation Lab and currently pursuing my LLM degree in Commercial Law and International Trade Law. So despite this, I'm also the co-founder of Nyayik Paridhi, which is an NGO in Nepal dedicated to justice and legal education. So it gives me immense pleasure to welcome you all to this episode of Digital Dialogue on TikTok Banned Impact on Digital Rights and Freedom of Expression. So I will be moderating our discussion for the next hour and a half. So kindly turn on your camera for a more engaging experience and keep your microphone muted until invited to speak. To help facilitate introduction, please rename yourself with your full name and the country you are joining from. So this session will be recorded and may be shared on our official platform. So if you have any concerns, contact us at info@youthinnovation.org. So please be aware that the content discussed here represents the personal views of the speaker and does not constitute official recommendation or statement from Youth Innovation Lab. So this webinar is intended to foster meaningful engagement, not to serve as an official quote or endorsement. So we appreciate your cooperation and look forward to this productive discussion. So today we are here because digital platforms like TikTok have not just changed the game, they have rewritten the rules on how we communicate, express ourselves, and even make a living out of it. So recent bans and restrictions across South Asia have ignited a heated debate about digital rights, freedom of expression, and the fine line between the regulations and censorship. So these platforms, like two sides of the same coin, can be a force for a good or let's say a gateway to a misuse. We definitely cannot deny the fact that there have been the instances where harmful content have emerged in this platform impacting the rights and public safety. But does that mean the whole platform should be banned, or should we focus on removing the content that actually crosses the line? So today, in this dialogue, we will peel back the layers of these complex issues, exploring the various dimensions from the impact of these bans to their legal and ethical implication, and ultimately, searching that sweet spot where freedom meets responsibility. So before we dive into our panel discussion, I would like to invite Ms. Aruna Joshi, Project Lead of Porch Project, to provide a brief overview of the Porch Project, its goals, and its work in advocating for digital rights. Over to you, Aruna.
Hello, everyone. So first of all, thank you so much for being here in the webinar. I am Aruna Joshi. I'm leading the Porch project, Porch being protecting online rights of change makers, where change makers are youth and women of this era. So this project, we thought of it. I was with the inception, with the team during the inception of the proposal writing, and we thought that the change makers should be the youth and women of this era, where they would make a significant impact, and they would be the people to talk about the change, to have to start the dialogue, to do the conversation and everything, and they are the change makers. So one of our partner organization, the representative of partner organization, Janeeth, is here as well. I think he will also share more about the project that we are doing and the impact of the project that we are doing. So the Porch project we are doing with four other partner organization, first from Nepal. Then from Nepal, Youth Innovation Lab is doing the project. And then we have partners from India, Sri Lanka, and Bangladesh. So yeah, we are doing this digital dialogue to create that conversation going on, that discussion going on between the change makers. Yeah, thank you. So over to you again, Rabina. I'm looking forward to the wonderful discussion that will happen in the webinar.
Thank you, Aruna, for that insightful introduction to the Porch Project. So before we dive into our today's discussion, I'm excited to introduce our esteemed panelists. So first up, we have Advocate Rashtrabhi Mochan Thimal Sinha, popularly known as Random Nepali from Nepal. So Advocate Timal Sinha is a seasoned legal practitioner with expertise in intellectual property, cyber and criminal law. He also serves as the assistant principal at National Law College. He combines his deep legal expertise with a passion for public education. As a prominent content creator, Advocate Timal Sinha is dedicated to raising awareness about legal issues in Nepal, making complex legal concepts accessible to everyone. Next, we are joined by Janith Rodrigo from Sri Lanka, the general manager at Idea Hell and Derena Macro Entertainment. With over 15 years of experience in digital media, Janith is a passionate advocate for digital empowerment and innovation. As a digital strategist and expert in content creation, he has worked extensively on digital rights, combating misinformation, and empowering youth through digital platforms. His insights are crucial in understanding the impact of TikTok bans on freedom of expression in South Asia. Last but certainly not the least, we have Bhanupriya Rao from India, the founder and editor of Behenbox, an independent digital media platform dedicated to gender journalism. With more than 13 years of experience in journalism, advocacy, and public policy, and with a background in organizations such as ActionAid and Oxfam, she is a leading expert in freedom of information and accountable governance, making her a key voice in our today's dialogue. So each of our panelists brings a unique perspective on today's topic, and I'm definitely looking forward to a thought-provoking and enriching dialogue. So let's get started. Rashtra sir, let's start with you. Shall we get started, sir?
Sure.
Okay, sir. So let's begin with your insights on a recent development in Nepal. So Nepal recently lifted the TikTok ban after 10 months of its restriction, which was initially imposed last November due to concern over its negative effect on social harmony. So this decision basically came after the implementation of directives on the operation of social networking 2023, which required social media platforms to establish local offices in Nepal to address users' concerns more effectively. So my question to you is, in your view, did the TikTok ban effectively address the issues related to social harmony and misinformation, or let's say it did have the unintended consequences on our digital rights and freedom of expression?
So thank you, Ravina, for the question. And it's a very pertinent question when you consider Nepal's situation with regards to TikTok, because while the official position with regards to why TikTok was banned was somewhat said to be like, with regards to the digital directive where it has to be registered inside Nepal and this and that. But we could see that a lot of other social media platforms were not actually registered inside Nepal, but yet were continuing and they continue to flourish inside Nepal. So the whole idea that TikTok was banned because of the social media directive was somewhat, flawed. The main idea, I still believe, is more of a political reasoning. There's a political reasoning behind it when we consider the ban of TikTok inside Nepal. And me, I personally never supported the ban of TikTok in Nepal because there's a reason behind it. Because the reason is that there needs to be a proper or a particular reason. There needs to be a proper legal reason for something to be banned, right? So when it was said that TikTok needs to be banned in Nepal because it's creating it is disturbing social harmony, we have to go and look into the legal facts as well. So when we look at the legal facts, what we could see during that time was that about only 6 to 7% of the cases regarding disruption of social harmony actually came through TikTok at that period of time. In Nepal, when we consider other social media platforms, like maybe not exactly social media platforms like Facebook Messengers, Facebook, and other social media platforms like Instagram, those platforms were actually more, in technically, in legal sense of view, were more had more cases inside Nepal rather than TikTok. So the reasoning given by government right then was not in line with what was actually taking place in Nepal. So the idea of banning TikTok was with regards to maintaining social harmony. The real reasoning behind it was not social harmony, and it was something else. That is why I never supported it. the idea of TikTok ban in Nepal. Sadly, the Supreme Court also, unlike before earlier, did not issue let's say an order, interim order, to stop this decision made by the government, which was really sad. But at the end of the day, the ban of TikTok only served as a, you know, let's say a backward step for freedom of expression, and not just freedom of expression, but more, how would I say it, even livelihood of a lot of person when we consider Nepal's situation as well.
Thank you so much, sir, for sharing this perspective. Moving forward, sir, in our country's context, Article 19 of the Constitution of Nepal has provided for the right to communicate and share information through any medium, including electronic and digital platforms. So this particular article allows for the reasonable restriction on the objectionable content that breaches the law itself, but this provision of Constitution does not anticipate the prohibitions of the mediums or platforms which is actually used for publishing or, let's say, transmitting the content, like TikTok. So given this, what kind of policy suggestion would you like to give to our lawmakers in this regard, sir?
So when we consider the, let's say, policy level thing, or even like, using these platforms as intermediary of publishing post, a recent example of Telegram comes into my mind, right? Right now, the founder of Telegram was recently arrested because for harboring, they say that for harboring terroristic and other illegal activity inside the whole inside the platform, and them not regulating it. So basically, basic idea was with regards to that. So the change in this perspective is, from this we can see that the change in the perspective is not just inside Nepal. It is happening worldwide as of right now. So when we consider the, let's say, policies for digital platforms inside Nepal, my suggestion would be, first of all, to, let's say, decriminalize a lot of things. Right now, the major problem for Nepal has been criminalization of every single activity that comes across as cybercrime. And as of right now, Nepal does not have very developed cybercrime. So even smallest of the, let's say, smallest of the things that you say would actually be construed as cybercrime, and the people are being sent to custody for investigation. They're being kept in custody for 24 days, sometimes 17, 18, 19, 20 to 24 days, then file the case. A lot of them are at the end of the day acquitted by the court. But just because the police has the right to, file the case and take them into custody they are doing so and actually hampering the freedom of speech. So my first policy suggestion would be, we say Schedule 1 cases inside Nepal, to remove a lot of these cases from cybercrime purview and remove them from Schedule 1 cases inside Nepal, and turn it into, let's say, more of a defamation or other cases when required per se. Secondly, what policy changes are right now, what other policy changes are right now required? Let me see, is to actually follow through the decisions made by the Supreme Court in Nepal. Supreme Court recently has come up with a lot of cases, precedents, when we consider what is hate speech, what is considered as hate speech, what is not considered as hate speech. But the problem right now is, even those decisions are given, people know, and the law enforcement actually know about these cases. But in reality, what is happening right now is that those decisions are only being taken into consideration by the court itself only. But the decision given by the court should be enforced by the law enforcement agencies as well. When arresting someone, they should realize that this is the definition. So this does not fall under the purview of the certain statements made through social media, does not fall under the purview of these cases as per the Supreme Court's order. But that is not happening right now. Second would be that. Thirdly, I will and am always against, regulating content publishers as, let's say, a party to a crime, unless there's a willful, negligence or willful conduct done by those sort of intermediaries. As of right now, Nepal is also trying to pass a law wherein intermediary wherein even ISPs, internet service providers, will be considered as a party to the crime when certain such items like pornography are published and they do not stop it. So my policy, my policy suggestion would be not to include them under this as well, and only include when there is a willful misconduct done by these sort of let's say platforms. And as usual, bring out a regulation wherein the government can, through the court order, not by themselves, through the court order, actually find out the people, the parties who are actually breaching someone else's right through defamation, through through defamation or through any other mediums like breaching social harmony. As of right now, this is not being done through the ground level itself. The investigation is really poor. The process used during investigation is sending them to custody, even for the smallest of things, is really poor. The law right now is being worded in such a broad manner that anything and everything can be construed as cybercrime. That should be changed as well. So a bottom-up approach of complete change of these laws are required as of right now in Nepal.
Thank you, sir. Those are really a valuable recommendations. So now considering to the broader context, what insights from Nepal's experience would help share digital policy in South Asian countries, sir?
So to be really honest, I do not think Nepal's digital policy is the epitome of digital policy around the world. It is still in very infancy stage, and a lot of things, a lot of policies we actually have to import through other nations as well. But even considering that, one thing I've realized is with regards to certain, when I look at digital policies, and with especially when we consider digital platforms and freedom of speech in countries like India and other countries, right now, one of the better things Nepal has is that the government does not have direct intervention over such materials, right? A lot of countries ask the providers like maybe X or maybe Twitter or TikTok to take down the post directly, maybe even YouTube, if that comes through. Those sort of infringement directly has not taken place in Nepal. And I think that is very important because these things are very subjective things. The idea of government regulating speech is the idea of government regulating morality, because what is good, what is bad is something, it's very gray area, it's a subjective area. And if only one official can decide what is good and what is bad and what is to be taken down and what is not to be taken down, it could create a lot of problem, and it could lead to censorship through the media and censorship of the social media as well. So one thing that I think other countries could learn from Nepal is limited, intervention of government in regulating social media content through Nepal.
Thank you, sir. Sir, shifting towards to our focus to the international practices, we can see several countries, including the Australia, the United Kingdom, Estonia, or let's say the various European Union institution as well have opted to ban TikTok solely on the government devices due to their security concerns. So Nepal's approach, if we see, it seems to be more extensive, imposing a nationwide ban on this app. So from this perspective, sir, how can Nepal, learning from the international practices, develop the alternative regulatory measures that Nepal could explore in order to address the security and privacy concerns without broadly restricting the access to digital platform in the future, sir?
So you're actually correct. A lot of countries in Nepal, not including Nepal, have actually outright banned TikTok as well, but they do have their legal reasoning. One problem I had with the ban of TikTok in Nepal is there was no legal reasoning or no proper reasoning behind it, just a vague term of social harmony that was put forward. For example, India has banned TikTok as well, but it is due to the relationship between China and India and data privacy and data sale. And it's an issue that has come around all around the world as well, especially when we consider Chinese developers and Chinese app, because they are supposed to produce data and information anytime the Chinese government actually want to. So that has been an issue all around the world. It has been a huge issue in US as well, where we could see a Senate hearing for TikTok's CEO as well, which was quite, let's say, viral in social media and TikTok itself as well, right? So what could Nepal learn as regulatory measures is, first of all, Nepal's government need to learn that there is something called regulation. Because in Nepal, the problem, what I've seen is that either there's no middle ground in Nepal for a lot of things like this. There's either it's completely open without any regulation, or it's completely banned. There's nothing in between. So first thing government of Nepal and the policymakers should realize is, yes, there are things that we can regulate. There are things that we can actually promote, and there are things that we can actually, do in order to have a middle line ground as well. So that is something Nepal needs to realize first. Then secondly, what we need to do with regards to Nepal, what we can learn is your question. Let me see, is that yes, there is digital privacy concern, and Nepal has a lot of problems with regards to that as well. Recently, a report that was brought forward inside Nepal showed us that Nepali government email address and IP addresses are used to log into pornographic websites as well. Those are the report that we came to know as well. So a lot of learning for government officials and officials that hold these data are to be done. Training and regulations and policies are to be set forward so that people like this, data privacy and data information, are not shared and do not go through illegal channels to countries which could actually, misuse the data and maybe, attack your sovereignty as well. There are a lot of issues like this in America regarding Russian intervention through, in American election as well. So to remove those things, policies are to be brought forward, and especially in government issued ID, government issued computers, government issued devices, and in government institution itself as well.
Thank you, sir. Sir, finally, with your background as both a lawyer and a content creator, could you please share some of your any sorts of personal, or let's say a professional experience you have had related to the TikTok ban?
So when we consider the TikTok ban, it actually hampered a lot of content creators as a whole during that time, because a content creator, let's say, economy was and is booming in Nepal right now. The promotion that is being done for a lot of companies and a lot of products are done through social media, not traditional media. Recently, if you see right now, it's either Instagram marketing or TikTok marketing in Nepal right now. So a lot of people who actually earn money through TikTok, and even a lot of promotion that I did through TikTok was completely stopped. So my certain earning that I could do through TikTok and other social media was stopped. Not only that, TikTok, if you look at TikTok right now, TikTok then as well, not right now, then right now I didn't have the statistics. It was said that more than 30% of the Nepal's informal and e-commerce promotion was done through TikTok, and a lot of sales was done through TikTok during that time. So the people who use TikTok to promote their business, to do business, to sell their products, were completely cut off from the world during the ban as well. So as a content creator and as a lawyer, and especially it hampered the females, because these sort of content creators who sold through social media were apparently 80% of the person were housewives who sold through house. So we can look it from gender's lens as well. 80% of the female who would earn money through house were cut off from their earning as well during that time. So my idea from the people I have spoken to was that it was a very abrupt, it was a very non-necessary step that was actually taken by the government, which now finally is being overturned, and finally people can finally come back and do their business inside TikTok as well.
Thank you so much, Rashtra sir, for sharing your insights and experience with us. I really do appreciate your thoughtful responses to these complex issues. So now we will now move on to our next speaker, but I would also like to remind everyone that there will be a question and answer session at the end of the discussion. So please note down any questions or comments you may have with Rashtra sir and the other panelists hereinafter, and we will address them in the next session, afterwards shortly. So now let's turn to Janith Rodrigo. Sir, shall we begin, sir?
Yes.
Okay, sir. Janit, sir, as we know that Sri Lanka has experienced several social media's restriction, including the TikTok ban during the times of political unrest, like, for instance, the 16-hour blackout in April 2022 amid the widespread protest over the economic crisis. So I was just curious from your perspective, how this regulation of digital platforms, let's say, especially when tackling issues like misinformation and hate speech, have actually impacted the freedom of expression and digital rights in Sri Lanka, sir?
Yes, Ravina. I think from a overall perspective, the blockage of internet overall, I feel like personally and ethically is wrong, because one, it prevents the free flow of information and ideas. And I feel like beyond that, Ravina, what I see, because of the field I'm in terms of helping content creators and digital advocacy, I feel like there's a huge economic cost, especially when there's an internet blackout. So Sri Lanka has done this thrice now, and repeatedly what the government claims is that it is to allegedly stop the spread of misinformation. But what I feel is, I think the theme of my answers to most of your questions today would resonate. This is platform specific action, which is far more effective than a blanket ban, whereas a blanket ban has room for a lot of repercussions that are bad for the economy, bad for freedom of expression, bad for democracy as a whole, right? So in terms of the blackout that Sri Lanka had during its economic crisis, I think the government explanation that it was to stop misinformation is almost unfounded. And there was about a 70% drop in internet usage during this time, because, as you know, most South Asian countries, our internet usage is through some form of social media website and messaging platform. And our internet penetration is beyond 50% of the population, right? And I work with a lot of content creators, a lot of businesses, a lot of entrepreneurs, especially women-led entrepreneurs in Sri Lanka. I think this is true of all other South Asian countries as well. A lot of women use the internet to get mileage for their businesses and startups, right? So the cost of that was huge. So in terms of blanket block, which we've had about 3 now, I feel like is a direct infringement of the freedom of expression, the freedom of movement, the freedom of discourse, all of that. And in terms of solutions, I feel like more platform-specific action is needed, especially in South Asia. I can't speak for the other countries, but in terms of Sri Lanka, I feel like the platforms take not enough action when it comes to the spread of misinformation, especially because of our different languages, our vernaculars. There's not enough vetting when it comes to misinformation. So this leaves room, I feel, for governments to use this excuse of, we are going to stop the spread of misinformation. Platforms aren't doing much about it, so blanket ban, right? So I feel like this has left a bit of a scapegoat for governments to use, right? So I feel like the solution lies primarily with platforms, right? Facebook, we have the big three, right? So I feel like platform specific action is the best way to curb misinformation. And number two, an independent oversight body. I feel like that is needed. And I feel like most governments, especially in our region, use vague terminology, very broad terminology. I think when we talk about the Online Safety Act of Sri Lanka, you will realize everything is termed very broadly, which leaves a lot of room for interpretation. And that is not healthy, right? So very specific and narrowly tailored language needs to be used when we talk about curbing misinformation. And also, I think a great example I can use is the German Network Enforcement Act, which has enough transparency, but enough oversight to curb misinformation. I feel like that could be a good example to use, especially when it comes to misinformation, rather than just going and doing a blanket social media blackout. Acts like that, I feel like, would be helpful for Sri Lanka and our region as well.
Thank you, sir. So following up on that, Sri Lanka recently, as you said, approved the Online Safety Act 2024. So basically, which grants the significant governmental control over the online content, allowing for the removal of the post which is deemed to be prohibited statements. So, and even the legal actions against those who publish them. So, sir, in light of this development, how do you anticipate the impact on the freedom of expression for the people of Sri Lanka, sir?
Yes, Ravina, the Online Safety Act, we used to talk it as the bill, but now it has become law. It's an act now. The language of this act is very vague, leaves a lot of room for interpretation. What is deemed prohibited statements, which can be left up to a lot of imagination, is enough for even sentences like jail sentences, not just the removal of content. So this honestly is, as a country, a step back in terms of digital rights and advocacy. However, we are looking at what can be done now that this has come, because unfortunately Sri Lanka still doesn't have post-legislative scrutiny. So once something is law, there's absolutely no way to figure out whether this is working or whether this is good or whether this infringes on the fundamental rights of people. So right now we are having to deal with it. So a recent study found that close to 85% of civil society organizations in Sri Lanka feel like that this act is a direct sponsorship, a direct censorship of any dissenting voice. So this has been a setback, but I feel like what can we do, right? I'm more solution centric than most. So I always think, what can we do now that this is out? Right now, I think the best thing for us to do is to make the definition of this act a little bit more narrow and take broad definitions such as prohibited statements out, or at least give it some sort of interpretation through the courts, which would give a little bit more freedom of expression to the people, right? And also, there's absolutely no independent appeal mechanism in this act, right? It's mostly government appointed officials who will deem what is appropriate and not, and that is not good. So I feel like an independent appeal mechanism needs to come, right? And also at least some transparency on what kind of content is taken down and what action is taken against whom under this act. Again, there's no transparency about this in Sri Lanka. We do not know what kind of content is taken down. We do not know who is arrested under this act. That information is not freely available. So I feel like one of those three would improve the situation. But however, in terms of an overall act that has been passed in this country, this is definitely a setback in terms of our freedom of expression.
So thank you, sir. So now stepping back to the broader South Asian context, over the past decade, we can see that our region has become a vibrant hub for digital activity. So we basically can see millions people engaging on online platform for self-expression, be it business or let's say social activism itself. So however, sir, recent actions like social media bans, including TikToks, have definitely intensified debates about the balance between our digital freedom and regulation. So, sir, my question to you is that given your extensive experience in digital media management and advocacy, particularly in empowering youths and women in civic engagement, how do you foresee the evolution of digital platform in South Asia in light of these restrictions, sir?
Yes, Robin, I think you correctly put it. I feel like the internet and especially digital media is the great equalizer, right? It has leveled the playing field because most of the time, since I work closely with content creators, YouTubers, I feel like this digital space has taken away huge barriers to entry, which I feel like is a great thing. Previously, media, content, everything was controlled by those who had resources, whereas now, if you are creative, if you are interesting, if you can build traction, anybody can gain that following, right? However, as is everything, there are bans, there are restrictions, there are censorships. In terms of our region, I mean, I think South Asia has close to 800 million internet users as of this year. I feel like there needs to be more regional action, because the problems that we face, for example, when I was listening to the speaker before, most of the problems we face are kind of homogeneous due to our region, right? How we use technology is a little similar, and the problems we face in terms of freedom of expression is similar. So I feel like more regional action is needed. I feel like a regional standard for content regulation. See, as a small country, coming from Sri Lanka, it's very difficult for us to look at these big platforms and ask them to take country-specific action. However, I feel like there would be far more weight if we approach this as a region, right? I mean, the EU has the Digital Services Act, right? As a region, if countries do get together and there is lobbying, I feel like there could be more platform-specific action, which, like I said from the beginning, I feel like is the answer to most of what we talk about, right? If the platforms do enough, the governments can't say that we need to step in. Right? So I feel like that's one thing we can really work on, a regional standard for content regulation. And also obviously digital literacy campaigns. I've done a few in Sri Lanka, I've done a few in Cambodia, but at the end of the day, I feel like it's not enough still. If the population is more literate, a lot of misinformation, at least the sting of it, could be dulled, right? And also more cross-border collaborations. I mean, I've heard of the framework for ASEAN, the digital plan. Again, I think more regional collaboration is needed to curb misinformation and also prevent censorship by governments, if that makes sense.
When we are talking about regional cooperation, so my final question to you is that, given that the shared cultural, social, and technological landscape of South Asia, how can India, Sri Lanka, Nepal, Bangladesh, along with other countries in this region, collaborate more effectively on digital rights and platform regulations to create a balanced approach that respects the freedom of expression while also addressing the legitimate concerns such as misinformation and data privacy, sir?
Yes, Ravin, I think I would circle back to my earlier suggestion. I propose the establishment of a South Asian Digital Rights Forum. I think that could, because the European Union has its own data protection board. I think you would have heard about it, right? It brings together governments, civil society, technological companies, platform providers, right? All to create a digital rights framework. So if our countries are to get together, if we are to collaborate on something, I feel like this would be our top priority, which would be to create a digital rights framework for our region, right? Because what we face in terms of misinformation is very different sometimes to what is misinformation in the West. What we say is derogatory in our native language is sometimes not derogatory in English, right? So this needs to come from our region. So I feel like one of the solutions is to create a regional forum that brings government, civil society, all the actors to the table, so that a more robust digital rights framework can be created. And also another easy way that we can look at things is we do have certain digital rights frameworks that have worked across the countries in different regions. We can look at some of that, right? And we already have trade agreements in our region, like the SAFTA, the South Asia Free Trade Agreement, right? We could look at including digital rights, digital trade, data privacy clauses into existing trade agreements. I think that's one easy way of, without having to look at a broad alliance and a broad agreement between countries, we could look at adding data related clauses to agreements we already have within our region, within our countries. So I feel like that's also another easy way we could look at in terms of a regional collaboration. But whatever said and done, Robin, I feel like as a region, if we collaborate, this could work. But if as individual countries, individual country organizations, advocates, if we try to pressure or to lobby with platform providers, I feel like that doesn't work that well. So to move forward for effective action, I feel like a regional collaboration of some sort is definitely needed.
Thank you so much, Janitza, for your valuable insights. So your perspective has definitely added a lot to our conversation. So now moving forward with our next panelist, Ms. Vanupriya Rao from India. So ma'am, shall we begin?
Yes, sorry, I was muted.
Okay, ma'am. So, ma'am, my first question to you revolves around a documentary which I came across. So, while researching about the TikTok ban in India, I came across a documentary about Mahesh Kapse, who was a rural influencer, was one of among the 200 million active TikTok users in the country. So, for the people like Mahesh, TikTok was more than just an app. It was definitely a platform that brought a fame and, let's say, a significant source of income too. So the ban in 2020, which was enforced under Section 69A of the Information Technology Act of India, has definitely created significant challenges in the country. So my question to you is, in reference to this particular case, or let's say the documentary itself, how has this ban affected the lives of the people like Mahesh in India, who relied on TikTok for their livelihoods and also social presence, ma'am?
Yeah. First, thank you, Rabina, for having me. It seems such a long time ago that we've in India almost forgotten about TikTok. For us, it doesn't exist anymore, right? And so, in a way, we've moved on. And so, when you ask me about this platform, about this webinar, and the title of it being a ban of TikTok and its impact, I really had to dig deep into my memory to understand really what the impact has been. But I'll use the idea of TikTok specifically, but I'll also come back to the larger point um, about not just platform bans, right? There is a big problem of internet bans in India, which are used by the governments to repress civil liberties and freedom of speech and expression and all of that, which we are seeing quite a lot of. It is nothing new. We are seeing heightened um, varieties of it and indiscriminate and use of these sort of bans. In fact, India ranks probably the highest in the world in terms of as far as internet bans are concerned. So um, there is really nothing to be proud of it. But coming back to your specific question about TikTok, and when I said I really had to dig deep into my memory to sort of bring out what TikTok actually did to people, right? And why its ban, say, had a lot of impact, right? Now TikTok was really one of those platforms which gave a certain kind of democratic use, right? It democratized the digital space, and for the first time, in fact, in the digital space, we saw um, in TikTok's case, people with a country from a country like India, which is highly segregated, highly, I mean, there is caste, class, regions, and highly unequal. So in a way, TikTok kind of blurred those inequalities in the form of access, really. So suddenly you found people from repressed, marginalized communities like Dalits, Adivasis being able to use something that has such little barrier to access and creation. Really bad. Actually, the good thing about TikTok was the barrier to very little barrier to creation. You could just simply create a video, in no time and without much equipment and all of that. So that really kind of blurred those, that gave a sort of democratic access. We saw it. So our friends from Nepal and Sri Lanka spoke about the economic aspects of it, which is pretty much the case with India as well. Especially if you looked at it from a gender lens, I think about 50% of the users were women, and they were using it for businesses, for with their followers, they were making money out of it. But I think for me also, what was really interesting was about the kind of expression of the different other identities also. So for the first time, where you couldn't, I think in the digital space where there was so much trolling, so much else, people coming from marginalized communities, Dalits, Adivasis, etc. They queer people, they could find a space for expression, right? And that meant quite a lot. So that really kind of eased the social boundaries, at least in the digital space. The stuff that you were seeing in the physical real world were somewhat eased in the digital space. Now with that ban, what happened was really then, apart from the economic cost to it, there was also a social cost, right? And the social cost being then that other platforms that were available, say of a similar category, which is more video based, say something like Instagram, which has the Reels function. I mean, they're slowly making their way, but it isn't. One fine day you shut a platform, and to then find a immediate replacement and find your own space in another platform is rather difficult. I mean, it takes years to build that community, to build that presence, as Rastra would know, as he's a content creator himself. Um, so and all of a sudden you're having to shift to another platform, right? And I've read about users who creators who lost and were never able to make up the same kind of followership on a platform like Instagram, with the Reels function and everything. But also you'll have to understand that Instagram comes with a certain elite sort of presence as well. I mean, for it to democratize, like I said, you will see that people from marginalized backgrounds are making space, but it isn't the same as TikTok. It used to be. But then also the barriers, and I'm told that to make a reel, which seems like, oh, just putting something together, is still very production heavy, right? It isn't as simple a barrier to as simple ease of creating as TikTok. So yes, there is an economic cost, there is a social cost, and especially for marginalized communities, queer people found their community, queer people found their way of expressing. They found their space, voice, and so on. So in terms of the impact, really, about this specific platform, it has been immense, and one that is already very forgotten, it seems, in a country like India, because we are constantly dealing with newer problems all the time, right? It isn't about just one platform. It is also, then the question really is, how do we look at different other platforms and internet and digital as a space, and how that is both safe, um, for women, gendered minorities, and all other form of minorities, and also how these tools are becoming a way of control for governments, right? And this has, like I said, it is not new. In Kashmir, in the Northeast, internet bans have been frequently used to control populations. But now we are seeing much more of that, and that is the problem that we really need to address, I feel.
Thank you, ma'am. Ma'am, moving forward, it's been already definitely that the TikTok is being banned in India. But however, considering Nepal's recent decision to uplift its TikTok ban, is there any possibility that India might reconsider its stance on a platform in the future?
Well, if I were running the government, I would, but I am not. I think, as you know, the history of the ban had more to do with India and China's geopolitical relations at that time, rather than Rastra was talking about how it had to do with this idea of maintaining a social fabric and social harmony in Nepal. In India's case, that wasn't the reason, because um, uh, it had to do with the prevailing tensions between India and China at that point, and therefore a slew of companies were banned. Shein is one of them, TikTok was another, and so on and so forth. So whether they're going to be restoring them is something we don't know really, and we've also had a particular sort of uh, we've had a kind of taming of the last government in a way in the recent elections in the sense that they have not come back with a kind of majority that they felt they were going to come back with, which gives the opposition much more leeway to sort of bargain and, which we had completely forgotten as part of our parliamentary democracy in the last 10 years. But that space we've got back, so which is why what you will see is the ramming of, there was a new bill that they were ramming through, barring, trying to, where the Ministry of Information and Broadcasting would control the content creators, so anyone, and content creators could be podcasters, could be anyone, who probably the government thought were critical of them. They could be controlled, through a system of penalty which ranges from fines to probably being put in jail, right? And many state governments are coming up with things like these things, which are the things we need to be careful about. So really, for me, if I come back to the problem, I wouldn't. For me, it really isn't one platform or the other. My problem really is the landscape of digital rights and freedom and control and authoritarianism and so on. See, at the end of the day, these are all just tools, and these are mechanics. If your larger framework of governance and rights and democracy don't function very well, then these one platform going away or coming back really doesn't matter, because all these questions of misinformation, what constitutes misinformation, what constitutes violation of rights, and so on and so forth, as our friends from Sri Lanka and Nepal were very rightly saying, that a lot of things that we consider as abuse is not considered by these platforms as abuse, right? Whether it's gendered, whether it's caste, whether it's queer, and so on and so forth. So I think what we really need to, what I would urge us to come back to is, and I know that TikTok is an important part of the landscape, but I think when we think about digital rights and and the internet, and because internet at the end of the day is a space, right? It is a space like in the physical world, so it needs to be safe. It needs to function for everyone, and it is like we say, internet is a public good. So it then we need to put all of this in the framework of governance, and then look at as Janit was saying, that look at it, look at some of the cross-cutting things and what we can enforce either through regional partnerships or even through country level sort of advocacy as to what really constitutes misinformation, what really is digital rights, what really are digital rights for different. Your digital rights are my digital rights are completely different from, say, a digital rights of a person who is maybe a content creator in rural West Bengal. Yeah, in the sense that we have equal rights, but then in operation it is not the same, right? I have better access. She doesn't. So these are all of the things that we need to take into consideration when we talk about digital rights and internet and space and so on, as opposed to one platform specific issue.
Thank you, ma'am. And my next question to you is, as the founder of Behin Box and an advocate for gender journalism, how do social media bans, such as the TikTok ban, impact the coverage and, let's say, the visibility of gender issue, ma'am?
Oh, quite a lot, like I just said. In the absence, what happens is, in the absence of access in physical spaces, digital spaces become very, very, very important, even though they're not easy to access for, I don't exactly know the numbers, but digital literacy and access is still really poor in India for women and for gender diverse persons. And by digital access, I mean like mobile internet access, but also it's not just having the mobile phone, but also, how much of it can you access, right? So for example, it is not that difficult to find people, women being controlled for the use of mobile phones. Like, okay, you may have a mobile phone, but if you are using it for more than an hour, then the society looks down upon you. It happens. It still happens. It happens with our community health workers who have been given mobile phones to record government data on their phones as part of their jobs. But they've told us that if we use it for more than an hour, our village elders will say something like, oh, aren't you using the phone too much? Are you becoming very advanced? So you see, access operates at different levels, right? It is not just mere physical access, it's also social access and so on and so forth. So when you have, and these are spaces that are hard fought by women. I mean, we tend to think, this is why I argue that digital is public good, right? In the sense that that access to it democratizes a lot of things, democratizes access to information that's so crucial for the lives of women and gender diverse persons. In the absence of it being available in the physical space, it's available in the other space, the internet space. So when you ban these things as a means of control, it has tremendous consequences on as an access to information advocate. I know how much the information on abortion means to a young girl in rural Jharkhand. Jharkhand is a state in India, and that, if that is not available to the person because the government has banned at a crucial point of time, she has no one to talk to, no access, no resources to access, and so on. Imagine the condition of that girl. And this is just one simple example that I can give you. Having said that, I also feel that with access, we also need to talk about safety and security of applying a gender lens, because uh, like I said, my space, my place in the digital world is not going to be the same as probably our friends from Nepal and India, because if I say something, I will be trolled tremendously. The men will be given a little okay, let's go easy on them. And trolling is just one aspect. There's anything that goes from mild trolling to rape, death threats, and so on. And these are real. These are not like, oh, um, let's just give it a pass, and it's just one random person on the internet. So there's a lot of things I feel that we really need to make space for. But that it is true that digital is a public good, whether it's a social media platform or whether it is a messaging app or whatever it is. It has tremendous use in access to information and access and expression of people. People feel seen. Women feel seen with these tools and technologies. So yeah.
Thank you, ma'am. So the final question for you for today, that in light of the recent TikTok bans in Saudi Asia, such as those implemented in India, and let's say considering Nepal's recent decision to uplift the TikTok ban as well. So my question to you is, how do you think can South Asian countries collaborate to address the challenges that these restrictions pose to digital rights and freedom of expression from your perspective, ma'am?
Yeah, actually, some of the recommendations that Janeet mentioned are really good, and I kind of agree. Number one, I think we need to many of our issues are quite common. Um, uh, Perhaps Sri Lanka is a little more equal country than many of our countries, where we have these things by caste and creed and religion and so on and so forth. Sri Lanka used to be a little more ahead in a lot of gender sort of indicators as well. And I say used to because I haven't followed in the recent years what it has been. But it used to have one of the best healthcare systems in all of South Asia, I'm told. But what I feel is that, many of our given our social stratification is somewhat similar across the region. Right? Nepal has a similar sort of caste related kind of whatever. I think where I feel a regional sort of a grouping what we can push for is a commonality of these experiences, these realities, which can then translate into things like what really is misinformation, what is abuse, for example, right? So if you're, I don't know, in India, it's very common to use what we call "maa behan ki gali," right? Which is a very gendered use of slang to kind of hit out at women, um, and but there are very very specific ones that are not, that maybe Facebook and TikToks and so on of the world do not know. Their moderators do not know. It's not part of their content moderation. This thing, which is what we saw also in many of these countries where a lot of hate crimes on Facebook. I think Myanmar is one of the examples where hate crimes then went unnoticed. Some of it was obviously deliberate, but it goes unnoticed because it is not considered as hate, right? So what are some of these common things that we can push for, right? Then also I always believe that I mean, SARC used to be a body of some faith at some point, but I feel that other forms of sort of regional groupings can come together, like the Digital Rights Forum that one of our friends was saying is a good idea, because there's also, it is not just about the commonality of the language, social realities and so on, which we can codify and push for, that hey, these are South Asian things, please include them in your content moderation strategies, etc. But also that we are seeing a lot of repression in a lot of our countries, right? So can we put collective pressure in terms of what regional groupings used to have, that sort of a power where you could use that to sort of push for more like more progressive things, right? At least democracy and like against civil liberties and so on. So maybe I think many of our countries are seeing those challenges again. India more so than many other countries. So I think a regional grouping can always put that sort of public pressure. I feel, and yeah. So these are some of the things that come. I feel, and I also feel that coming from a gender lens, there needs to be a very specific gendered way of looking at digital spaces, where because we all have a very common ethos and culture when it comes to South Asian patriarchy is something else, right? And it has, there's so much commonality in all of our countries when it comes to that. I think what then constitutes as gender-based violence, especially the technology facilitated gender-based violence as it's come to be known now, all of that can have a good, we can build a South Asia sort of collective and grouping that can either codify, pool in knowledge, resources, but also advocacy and change.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for your valuable insights. And finally, thank you all to all our panelists for this insightful contributions. So now we are opening the floor for questions and comments from our participants. I can see few questions in the chat box, but despite this, if you want to speak, please raise your hand, or let's say type your questions in the chat box, and I will direct them to the panelists. So before that, I would also like to request you all to please keep your questions quite precise and relevant to the topic that is being discussed, and specify which panelist would you like to indicate your question to. So I could see few questions in the chat box. The first question seems to be for Rashtra sir. Rashtra sir, are you there? Rashtra sir, you're not audible, I guess. So Rishabh writes, I would like to ask a question to Sir Rashtra from Nepal. What legal justification were used to implement the TikTok ban in Nepal, and how did these align with international standards on digital rights and freedom of expression?
uh,
So, so you're not audible.
as
I think
well.
there is some issue with the connectivity. So you
Hello.
are on mute. Yes, sir.
Yeah. Okay.
So you are audible now. You can proceed, sir.
So basically, we have already stated. I've already stated the reason behind it as well. It was said for a different reason, but the main reason provided was with regards to social harmony when it comes to Nepal. That it is breaking down the social fabric of Nepal, and it is, it is promoting, let's say, illegal activities as well. Was few of the reasons that was provided, and it was not a law that was passed per se, right? It was basically a directive order that was passed through the office of the prime minister during that time, after the suggestion was given by the IT uh, expert that worked under the office of prime minister. So it was not a law per se that banned the law. It was not a blanket ban as well. It was just a random decision that took place on a random day. So it was very weird when it came to when we came to know that it was banned out of nowhere as well. And when we consider the international standard of international standard, and did it align with the international practice? Obviously, when it comes to uses of media and everything, uses of media, social media and everything, it did not align with the international practice per se, because the idea, when I believe, is what I believe, and what the law believes internationally is that the area of morality, especially, right? Law and morality are two different areas, and moral regulation should not be done through government. Government should regulate the law, not the morality, right? So that is the general idea when it comes to regulation of social media, that when it comes to regulating anyone's life as well, and when it comes to regulating regulation of social media as well, because any right that is available offline should be available online as well. So, but however, what we need to consider is right now is the digital landscape, and the international standard is also changing as right now as well. A lot of countries right now, even in Europe, have uh, are looking into whether to you know restrict these sort of rights, because is it going too far beyond as well, right? I gave an example with regards to the not blanket ban, the arrest of Telegram CEO as well recently as well. So the international standard also has been changing, because a lot of negative things has also been you know being are also being let's say transferred through social media. But what we need to understand is that, as I gave you the statistics earlier as well, when we consider the breakage of social fabric or anything due to TikTok, the reasoning given by the government was actually not true, because when we look at the governmental statistics, when we look at the statistics of the government, the police, we could see that uh, other social media had more, cases filed in the court rather than the TikTok itself. So it was, as I said, I would not like to pinpoint a single event, but as I said, it was more of a, let's say, a political decision to curb certain movement in Nepal rather than just social harmony as a whole.
Thank you so much, sir. Another question from another participant in the chat box seems to be for Bhanupriya ma'am from India. So she writes, following the reason for the TikTok ban in India, what steps in India taking to regulate other social media platforms? Is there a framework in place to address similar concerns with other social media platforms to avoid the blanket bans? Ma'am, you are on mute.
Yeah. So, so I don't know. I think I would look at this question differently. Actually, I don't see a reason why the social media platform should be regulated by the government, right? I see that what needs to be regulated is what needs to be, as we discussed, is uh, uh, has to come from the framework of rights, right? What are my rights? And our constitution, the Indian constitution, is pretty clear on what constitutes hate, what constitutes freedom of expression, what constitutes I don't know, liberty, and freedom of speech, and all of that. Okay, now as advocate was saying, the rights that exist in the physical space should also be available in the digital space. So I don't think the question should be what how these platforms are being regulated. The question should be how are these rights being implemented in the digital space, right? And therefore, because once we start saying, hey, platforms need to be regulated, we get into a very, very difficult territory, which gives governments the power to regulate, anything, or rather, it gives, in the name of regulation, um, things like bans and restrictions and so on and so forth. The question needs to be enshrined in law, and therefore applicable in the digital space is all of these rights and what constitutes as freedom of expression, as opposed to hate against the government or something, or a libel or anti-national activity. See, it's a very thin line, right? If you ask the government, like, if I'm criticizing the government, it's my freedom, it's my political freedom, it's my civil freedom. But if the government starts to construe it and then starts to regulate these platforms, then we are in a very, very difficult trajectory here. And that's what we need to. And I think the question about what concerns is it to avoid blanket bans, but well, it's the government that has banned that a particular platform. So I don't think there is. It came that ban, the TikTok ban, came about as something in national interest. Now it's very difficult to argue what is national interest and what is not, right? So those are things that we need to keep in mind. But as far as the framework is concerned, that hey, in this instance you can ban something and in this instance you can't. Who is the arbiter, right? Is TikTok going to what court to sort of? I think that they did go to the Supreme Court and it was lifted for 6 months, and then they kind of brought it back and shut it down. So these are questions of law, and I think should be framed as such rather than regulating social media platforms.
Thank you so much, ma'am. We have got next two questions. It seems to be directed to our Janit sir from Sri Lanka. So the participant writes, how has the engagement of youth and women in digital spaces evolved in Sri Lanka, especially given the growing popularity of platforms like TikTok? Are there concerns about digital safety and data privacy that have sparked discussion around regulations, sir?
Thanks, Ravina. No, thanks for the question, Subha. So yeah, so since it's two-part, yes, with the increased internet penetration in Sri Lanka, youth and women do play a huge role in terms of the digital platforms. And the recent economic crisis that we had in Sri Lanka, the uprising, the protests were mostly youth-driven, and most of the protests originated online, right? So that goes to show how far digital space, youth, and the traction they have on these platforms has gone in terms of, I mean, this is the first time a president of Sri Lanka has resigned as a result of protests or any reason for that matter, right? So that was all purely driven by youth who were active in the digital space. However, when it comes to women, I think Bhanupriya rightly highlighted this. Even in Sri Lanka, there is a huge gender gap in terms of digital literacy, and this needs to be bridged because I work with the law enforcement in Sri Lanka closely because I've co-authored a handbook on how to tackle CSGBV that is used by most of the law enforcement authorities. That was initiated by a CSO in Sri Lanka. So even in that, what I saw, Rabina, is that with the increased use of internet, with more women coming online, the instances of cybersexual gender-based violence has increased. It's increased up to 70% over the last 3 years, which is quite alarming. Even with a smaller population like ours, they receive close to 1,000 complaints a day, which is overwhelming the system, right? So there is a bit of there's a big digital gender gap. So the only way to bridge that is to increase the digital literacy of our females, which again leads to bigger issues, right? We see that women in governance, though Sri Lanka boasts of having the first female prime minister in Sri Lanka of the world, we've not done much since, and it has deteriorated thereon. female representation in politics and decision making is quite bad now, right? And because I do political party trainings, I understand that the again the digital divide between males and females when it comes to politics and digital literacy is also huge. So we do have a lot of improvement that needs to be done in terms of digital literacy for women and minorities and marginalized groups. So that's one area that that I'm concerned about, especially when it comes to digital safety. But the overall ethos in Sri Lanka is that the youth do have a bigger voice because of digital platforms and them becoming influencers themselves, and that has become a big catalyst for social change in this country. So that's the answer to the two-part question.
Thank you, sir. So the next question is also directed to you. So Deepsika writes for Janet, sir, given your experience with social media regulation in Sri Lanka, what lessons or best practices do you think Nepal can learn from Sri Lanka's approach, especially regarding the implementation of laws to counter misinformation while also safeguarding freedom of expression?
Yes, Deepshika, I think we have shown Nepal what not to do. So do not bring about an online safety act which has vague terminology. So if you do implement any laws in terms of misinformation, the terminology, I feel like I think Rashtra would be a better person to answer this because this is legal. But I feel like the terminology needs to be very specific and narrow. I think that's when laws are effective. That's when laws are transparent, right? So don't do what we did. Do not have broad definitions of what misinformation or defamation is. In terms of safeguarding freedom, I feel like digital internet is twofold, right? It's a hammer. It can be a tool in the hands of the right person. It can be a weapon in the hands of the wrong person, right? But that does not give governments the right to ban nor censor, right? So in Sri Lanka, thankfully, the because of our recent economic issues and the social movement that resulted from it, politicians and those in power are a little wary of those who have traction online. So that in itself gives, especially our youth, a little bit of a safety net when it comes to what they say online, how it's perceived, because the youth themselves are becoming influential. They themselves have a lot of people behind them due to their traction online, right? So in terms of how you can take Sri Lanka's example, is empower your youth to be influential. So one of the programs I'm part of, it's called Create Incubator. What we do is I'm going to briefly tell you what we've done. We've taken content creators. So for the longest time in Sri Lanka, our civil society organizations did not have good digital presence, right? Their digital communication was weak, and I've done so many trainings. And what I realize is, okay, for the longest time we've tried to teach digital communications to civic active people, right? What if we flip the script? So what we try to do with Create Incubator is we taught civics and about democracy to content creators who are actually who have traction, who know digital communications, who know how to do a creative script. So that program in itself is becoming Sri Lanka's largest self-sustaining influencer base, right? So my advice to Nepal would be empower your creators, help them understand the responsibility they have with the traction they have online, and also help them become more civic and understand what inclusion is, understand different gender issues. So I feel like if you can do that, then you could have a bit of a safety net in terms of safeguarding your freedom of expression. And when you do have regulation regarding misinformation, make sure the language is narrow and very specific.
Thank you so much, our panelists. So I guess with this, we have come to the end of our panel discussion, since the time is also over, and I guess the questions from our participants is also over. So thank you to our panelists and participants for an engaging and thought-provoking discussion. So definitely the intersection of this digital rights, or let's say freedom of expression and regulation is indeed a complex yet a crucial area for us in South Asia. So your insights have been definitely very valuable to us. So I definitely look forward to continuing these meaningful dialogues and exploring more topics in our upcoming series of digital dialogue. So for now, this is Robina Casey, your moderator, signing off from now. So thank you so much, everyone, for being here. Thank you, our panelists. It was really wonderful session interacting with you all.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you for having us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you.